In today's adventure, we will explore the National Civil War Naval Museum. It is located along the banks of the Chattahoochee River. Along with its many historical relics and incredible full-scale replicas are the mammoth remains of the CSS Jackson, an armored floating ironclad fortress that was recovered from the muddy river bottom. I am Danny, and welcome to my channel, Danovator, where my experiences become your adventure. Today we're at the National Civil War Naval Museum here in Columbus, Georgia. Remember to please subscribe and please hit that bell so you'll be notified when I release my next video. Well, let's go explore. The museum fires this cannon, which overlooks the Chattahoochee River during special events. These cannons serve as historical examples of the types of cannons that were used during the Civil War, which I will assume could have been used on ships. Here's the window that I paid my $11 for today's pass. And behind the ticket booth is the gift shop. This oil on canvas was painted by William Spang, who was a Civil War veteran and artist from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am walking past paintings of Union and Confederate Navy vessels that were used in the American Civil War that took place from 1861 to 1865. You have the blue water, which is the open ocean, green water, which navigate in bays, gulfs, and sheltered waters, and you have brown water, which patrolled on the rivers. This placard compared the Union with the Confederate Navy. The Union Navy, with its federal backing, outnumbered the Confederates considerably. This hallway contains the Civil War timeline. Abraham Lincoln becomes the U.S. President on November 6, 1860. Jefferson Davis became the Provisional President of the Confederate States on February 9, 1861. And on April 12, 1861, the Civil War begins with the attack on Fort Sumter off the coast of South Carolina. Here are a few of the authentic Civil War flags on display. Obviously, with this being the Civil War Naval Museum, the timeline lists the historical events involving the Union and Confederate navies. On January 30th, 1862, the U.S. Monitor, which at the time was a state-of-the-art ironclad warship, was launched out of Long Island, New York. USS stands for United States Ships, which belonged to the Union Navy, and CSS stood for Confederate States Ships, which belonged to the Confederate Navy. The USS Water Witch was captured by the Confederate Navy in June of 1864 and was renamed CSS Water Witch. Here are recovered artifacts from the CSS Georgia, which was built in 1862. It didn't perform well in the Savannah River and was used as an anchored floating battery at Fort Jackson. As General Sherman approached Savannah in December of 1864, the ship was scuttled. Scuttle means the deliberate sinking of a floating vessel. David Farragut, who was the first Rear Admiral, Vice Admiral, and Admiral in the U.S. Navy, was aboard the USS Hartford on August 5, 1864. The Hartford penetrated through heavy enemy fire and dangerous underwater mines called Torpedoes through Mobile Bay in Alabama. This small cutter belonged to the U.S. Hartford. Let's step aboard this detailed reproduction gallery of the Hartford. We'll have to be very quiet. Some of the crewmen are sleeping. While invading Mobile Bay, Farragut would yell out the famous order, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." With its creaky floors, this display gives you a glimpse aboard the USS Hartford. Outside the Hartford, to the right, is a depiction of the innovative rotating turret of the USS Monitor. In March of 1862, the U.S. Monitor went head-to-head with the CSS Virginia at Hampton Roads, Virginia. It would be the first time that two ironclads battled each other. An ironclad is a ship that has a covering of iron armor layered over it. The battle resulted in a draw with neither ship being destroyed, but the USS Monitor did prevent the Virginia from continuing to threaten their blockade. The CSS Albemarle was a steam-powered river gunboat that helped protect North Carolina. This exhibit is set in Plymouth, North Carolina in 1864. That hanging cotton bell is a nice touch because cotton was used in the ship's hulls to help seal them when the wood contracted. It is to be noted that the ironclad sheets from the CSS Jackson were used on this display model. I had read that the temperatures could easily reach up to the 140-degree mark inside these ironclads. There were slits in the decking to provide some ventilation. The CSS Albemarle would be destroyed in October of 1864 by a tricky unmanned steam picket boat that was fitted with a spar torpedo. This is a reproduction of the 8-inch Blakely rifle used on the CSS Alabama. New ways to blow up things. During the Civil War, the term torpedo describes what we today call explosive devices. Union and Confederate troops were creative in inventing different ways of blowing up holes in the side of heavily armored ships. The National Civil War Naval Museum, as indicated in the start of my video, is located next to the Chattahoochee River. So it is only fitting that the CSS Chattahoochee's remains are displayed here. Here's a portion of the rear hull, which includes its propeller. There is also its rudder, an anchor, a ventilation grate, and a steam engine fixture. And here are its steam engines. There's also this collection of salvage tools and a display cabinet with a few more of its artifacts. This ship was scuttled on the 17th of April 1865, just a few miles away on the Chattahoochee River to avoid being captured by the Union. From the remains of the CSS Chattahoochee, we move into the sacred room of the CSS Jackson. Located in the corner is a picture of a local historical marker which describes that the last important land battle of the war between the states was fought here on April 16, 1865, which resulted in the capture of Columbus by Federal forces. This model 1857 12-pound Napoleon cannon is similar to the ones that were produced in Columbus during the Civil War. The CSS Jackson was built in Columbus, Georgia, and placed into the Chattahoochee River in December of 1864. It had not yet been put in service and continued to sit at the Navy Yard up until the date that the Union forces captured Columbus on the 16th of April, 1865. The next day, the CSS Jackson was set ablaze by the Union and unanchored and allowed to float down the Chattahoochee River. It partially sunk at a nearby river bend. Later it was recovered and placed in the first Naval Museum in Columbus in the early 1960s. The CSS Jackson was a little over 200 foot long and 57 foot wide at the beam. It weighed in at around 2,000 tons. A ghost-like framing was built to illustrate how the ironclad looked in its heyday. This anchor chain is an authentic artifact from the wreck. There's a mirror located underneath the CSS Jackson where you can see some of the cotton protruding from the wood seams that help seal the hull. The wood used to construct the Jackson was provided by Horace King. King was a former slave who became a famous Georgia bridge builder and engineer. This is how the ironclad armor was layered over pieces of pine and oak wood. It was an amazing experience to see how large these early naval fighting machines were in real life. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed my video today here at the National Civil War Naval Museum in Columbus, Georgia. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a big thumbs up. And always remember, your adventure awaits with the Danovator. I'll see y'all the next time.